Hello and welcome to the Rugby Roundup, November 13th, 2024. My name is Big Mike. Now let's talk some rugby. On this week's episode, we'll be talking about all of those amazing international men's games from last weekend and looking forward to another amazing weekend in the Autumn Nation series of rugby. But before then, as always, if you would like me to talk about any games, any competitions, please let me know. Best places to do this at YouTube at Big Mike Sports and at Instagram at Big Mike Sports NZ. Now, let's get to the roundup. Now, we will be talking about all of the international results from last weekend in no particular order, but we'll start with some of the big ones. First one, the biggest one for me. Ireland versus New Zealand. This one was played at Aviva. Ireland were going into this one as favourites, Six Nations champions, only had lost 2 games so far this year. New Zealand inconsistent. What was the final score in this one? Well, it was 9 points to 6 at halftime to New Zealand, and this one finished. All Blacks 23, Ireland 13. It was very clear in this one that it was Ireland's first game in a while. They were just not themselves, not the dominant force that we're used to. And the All Blacks have been building throughout the Southern Hemisphere winter to go up north and knock off the big boys. The big difference in this one was that momentum that the All Blacks had going into this one. Due to the difference between the Southern Hemisphere and the Northern Hemisphere seasons, they are closing off games. They are doing everything we'd hoped they'd do earlier in the year. Now we head to Twickenham. England versus the Wallabies. The Wallabies are very rank outsiders for this one. The game was back and forth. And in the 84th minute, Australia, who had just gone down a few minutes earlier, managed to get on top, score an amazing try in the corner to win this one 42-37. It was 20 points to 18 at halftime to the Wallabies. This game was the game of the weekend. It was one of the best international games since the World Cup. Wow. What this means for England is that they have lost 5 games this year by less than a converted try. England are not able to finish the games, which makes our big difference in this one Australia's ability to close the deal. And we didn't think we'd be saying that in November of 2024. Well done to the Wallabies. Then we're heading to Italy. It was Italy versus the Pumas, and Argentina once again got a great victory over a Tier 1 nation. 17-10 at half-time, which then became 50 points to 18. The Argentinians running away with this one in the second half. They were up early, 17-0 after half an hour. And the big difference in this one was just that great start. Argentina did really well, got out in front, and Italy never looked like they were going to get back. Then heading to Paris and the Stade de France, it was the French versus Eddie Jones's Japan. The big difference in this one was quality, as the final score was France 52, Japan 12. After 43 minutes, this one was 38-0 to the French. They came out, they needed a big victory. It will be interesting to see if this game was enough to prepare them for the All Blacks this weekend. Then we're in Cardiff at Millennium Stadium at the Principality. Wales taking on Fiji. Fiji was sitting in 10th. Wales in 11th in the world rankings going into this one. Early in the game, Fiji got a yellow and a red card and still managed to score a try. Wales were up 14-10 at halftime, and the Fijians were able to turn this one around with our flying Fijians winning 24-19. Big difference in this one was the heart that the Fijians showed. All that's left was Wales with 9 losses now in international games since the World Cup, 10 losses in a row. Final big game from the weekend was at Murrayfield. Scotland, who are doing so well, scoring some big victories over some Tier 2 nations, taking on the world champions, Rugby Championship champions Springboks. South Africa winning this one 32-15 over Scotland, who were unable to score any tries. Big difference in this one was the power of the Springboks with their atomic bomb squad coming in their second half. Scotland got an early red card after 11 minutes. They never quite looked like they could get it. They got a little bit close, but this was against the Springboks team that know how to close. In other results from international games, Canada versus Chile. Chile winning this one 44-14. Spain hosting Uruguay and getting a great victory 33-24. Portugal went down to the USA 17-21. Great victory for the USA, coming in from a little bit of momentum from a Pacific Nations Cup. And speaking of the Pacific Nations Cup, Tonga went up to Romania and went down 25-15 to their hosts. Also, Brazil got a huge victory over Hong Kong, 23-10. We had the Bristol Bears getting a draw with the Australian 15, 10-all. This one was really fun to watch online because a whole bunch of people that haven't been following rugby thought that the Wallabies got a 10-all draw with Bristol. And finally, Georgia hosted the All Blacks 15, this one finishing 31-13, All Blacks 15 over Georgia. What does all of this mean for the rugby rankings, the world rankings? Well, South Africa and New Zealand moved up to first and second, Ireland down to third. France stayed in fourth place with that victory over Japan. Argentina and Scotland moved up as England fell down to seventh. Australia up into eighth position, getting a bit of momentum, our Australian friends. Fiji jumped into ninth, Italy down to 10th. Wales are currently sitting in 11th with Georgia in 12th. Other big movers. Japan had a big drop down to 14th. The USA up to 16th. Spain up to 17th. And Brazil, with their big win over Hong Kong, went up to 26th in the world. Whoa! Okay, that's a lot to round up from last weekend, but let's get into our fun fact of the week. Now, we know that a lot of former professional rugby players, they go off and coach. They stay in the game, they commentate, they become analysts, they do something. But some of them end up doing very funny things. They might own supermarkets, go off and work in health, be in accounting, work at a law firm. Today we are going to talk about former 83 Test Wallaby David Pocock. This one was a fun fact from one of our listeners in Victoria, Australia. Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Now, David Pocock, born in South Africa, raised in Zimbabwe, played 83 tests for Australia. He is currently a senator in ACT Australia as an independent senator. How about that? Moving into politics, trying to make a difference in the best way he knows how. Fantastic. Congratulations, Mr. Pocock. Now, let's look forward to this week's games, which I think there might even be more on the list this week than there were last week. So, we'll start with games between teams ranked in the top 10 in the world rankings. First one's at Aviva, Ireland versus Argentina. This is third versus fifth. Now, Argentina have had big victories over South Africa, France, New Zealand, Australia, now Italy. Can they get the upset win in Ireland? Now, Ireland, on the other hand, are trying to regain their dominance of the world game. They don't want to go down 2 weeks in a row, especially 2 weeks in a row to Southern Hemisphere competition. That game's going to be fun. Off to Twickenham. England, who are now ranked 7th, will host the world champion Springboks. This one's going to be exciting. England have had so many narrow losses this year. South Africa have had so many big wins. They have had 2 losses, one to Ireland, one to Argentina. Can the Springboks continue their dominance? Our other big game this weekend. 4th versus 2nd in the world at the Stade de France. It is the French versus the All Blacks. Now, France have played one game since the July window of international games. That was last weekend against Japan. New Zealand have played a lot more. They have a lot of cohesion. Can the All Blacks do it, or will they go down to their genuine bogey side of France, one of the huge rivals for all of us from back home in New Zealand? We have a lot of trauma about the French, especially in World Cups. Let's see what happens this weekend. Now, other games involving top 10 teams. 8th ranked Australia heads into Wales to take on those mighty, mighty Dragons of the Welsh. As I said earlier, 9 losses so far this year, 10 losses in a row. Australia are trying to avenge that huge 40-6 loss from the World Cup that knocked them out last year. Wales versus Australia. 9th ranked Fiji are going into Spain, who are coming off a big victory last weekend. That'll be a curious game. Scotland, who have beaten 5 teams below Tier 1 this year, are currently sitting in 6th and will be hosting Portugal. I don't know who did the scheduling for Scotland this year, and I definitely don't know if that will be a good enough warm-up for an Australian team that might be a little bit on fire. Our other top 10 team, Italy, will be taking on 12th ranked Georgia. This one is always a great game. A couple of years ago, Georgia got the win over Italy. Italy try to prove their point that they are in the top 6. Obviously, Georgia cannot break into those 6 nations. It is a bit of a monopoly. There's lots of politics involved. They got a win over Wales a couple of years ago. Can Georgia get another win over a 6 nations team and really show the world what they can do? In other games, we have Romania taking on Canada. These are 2 teams that lost last weekend. Tonga, who lost last weekend, taking on the USA, who might have a little bit of momentum. And we've also got Japan and Uruguay, both teams that lost last week. That game and the USA-Tonga game will be taking place in France. And finally, Chile, who have got a little bit of momentum, will be heading in to Amsterdam to play a game against the Dutch. In our one non-test game this weekend, we have England A versus the Australian 15. Oh my goodness, those are a lot of games to go through. Now, I do want to see, if you're interested, please let me know on hearing my 5 for 5. Last weekend, I put $5 on 5 games, and I went home with over a couple $100. Thankfully, due to Fiji, Australia, South Africa, France, and Argentina all getting victories. If you'd like to hear my 5 for 5 every week, just let me know in the comments. Now, we're going to talk about our big 3 for this weekend. If you've only got time to watch one, follow one, see one, whatever one, make sure it's one of these 3. I always say that we get a few different games from different competitions. You know what, any of these international games are going to be good, but these are the 3 that I really do have my eye on. I'm not talking Australia-Wales. I'm not talking England-South Africa. I'm looking at Ireland versus Argentina. This one's going to be very, very interesting to see if the Irish can bounce back against a very inconsistent Argentinian team, but a forever improving Argentinian team. Then we obviously have the French versus the All Blacks in the same stadium where the All Blacks lost that World Cup opener last year. And for my 3rd game this week, I actually have Italy versus Georgia, because we never know what the Georgians are going to do, and that makes it really exciting. Okay, that's it for the roundup this week. Big, huge week without talking about domestic games. I know that the Women's Premiership has started up in England. I'll start talking about that soon. In the next few weeks, all of those competitions in Europe will be kicking off again, and we're nearly at Sevens time. It is an exciting time to be a rugby fan, but for now, we're going to focus on these big international games. And as always, from the bottom of mine to the bottom of yours, I truly hope that you have a beautiful week and you watch some beautiful rugby.